So hey, this is a video about a skill in a video game that is like 15 years old or something. So let's dive right into it. So Flare is actually a pretty good skill. Back in the day, it was definitely not considered good at all. You would get kicked from groups if you pinged this in your bar. People would get pretty upset with you and they would tell you, you suck, Flare's a bad skill, uninstall the game, go play warrior, all these sorts of like various insults. So the thing that changed with Flare is in an update, I think in 2012, it changed to if your overcast strikes adjacent. And overcast is what used to be exhaustion, which you can see here by this little gray symbol in Breath of Fire. Breath of Fire also didn't used to cause overcast, but because Overcast now enables you to do cool shit on Elementalist, they're like, hey, let's make it so you can do cool things now. So here's one of the cool things you can do. So let's use Flare as it was back in the day, not hitting Overcast or not striking adjacent because I'm not Overcast. So this is what it was. This is what Flare was. People just kind of use this. Generally, it was used as like filler, so you would use like bigger spells and then just spam Flare. But because it just hit a single target, it wasn't really that good. Mostly because things like Fireball exist. So Fireball has always had a 7-second cooldown. It always hit adjacent. This was just considered better than Flare, like even before like Eye of the North and Nightfall and everything. So generally speaking, Fireball is just a better skill. But now that Flare hits adjacent, this completely changes everything. So if I throw Breath of Fire down on this, start spamming Flare, you can see that I'm stacking with the DOT and then with Flare, and even right in that short little burst, I had 75 DPS, which is pretty good. If you actually damage test meta Searing Flames builds, they're surprisingly bad. They average 70 DPS. So as long as we're over 70 DPS, I would say the build is decent, at least for Fire Magic, because this is mostly a ranged build. In this situation, though, these are factions-only skills. I'm actually doing a playthrough where I'm just beating factions using factions-only skills, one of each profession. I just got mercenary slots. This is a new account with only factions, so I'm going to be beating like Winds of Change, hard mode, one of each profession, with mercenaries, and doing some other things that I'll outline in like future videos. But for now, I'll just stick to the Flare video. So this is a factions bar. Actually, it's surprisingly strong, mostly because of the update to Double Dragon. And this has actually stayed the same, surprisingly. Firestorm has been roughly the same. This used to hit around you. They changed it. Bed of Coals is now phenomenal. If you have an ally that knocks down, it sets things on fire for 7 seconds, and it now hits at foes' locations. So you can stack this, like if we're initiating combat with something, before aggro, like say you're like just at perfect range, you can like Breath of Fire, Bed of Coals, and then just start flaring. And that actually does a decent amount of damage. In this case, it like averages like 60 DPS. But with this whole build, when you're using this build correctly, you can average 70 DPS with bursts of like 135. So I'm just going to wait for him to reset there. Wait for these little guys to come back as soon as they feel like reviving. There they are. Alright, so we'll just throw down Double Dragon. So just from spamming these AoEs and spamming Flare, you can deal pretty good damage. Energy isn't really so much of a problem. You can always use Glyph of Lesser Energy. I have an alternate build for if there's like enchantment hate, but that's always a problem with Elementalist and PvE. There's always like some Chillblains Necro or something that just like removes all of your enchantments for no reason. Alright. So the main way that Flare is good now is you can just stack damage on an AoE like nothing. It's very cost effective. Like I'm almost never hitting low energy. The main way that I'm losing energy is from my overcast. Like right now I'm not even... Let's just bow. Oops. Let's bow. Alright, so I average 73 damage per second, which is a little bit above your average Searing Flames build. However, I don't have the energy problems of Searing Flames. All of this is adjacent, so Searing Flames does hit nearby. This is factions only skills, however, but you can throw Flare in any build, like a Savannah Heat build or something like that. Depending on what you're fighting, like if you're fighting enemies that are really spaced out, you don't want to run Flare, you want to run Lava Arrows. So that actually... So this is like a kind of Flare. Like it has such a low cooldown, and it hits nearby, which is very strong. Nearby is a much larger radius than adjacent. So if you're playing like some kind of content where enemies are further apart, you definitely want to use Lava Arrows. The only downside is that the projectile is much slower. So like Flare is like it's very fast. Like even just like spamming this out. Like you can see, like if there's like 10 enemies on here, like Flare is pretty good, honestly. It's a pretty good skill. And Double Dragon is obviously phenomenal. It's one of the best skills for Fire Ellie in the game. It's even used in PvP to some degree, like in RA and shit. So it's pretty good. But I figured it'd just be fun to make a video on Flare, just to kind of like theory craft a bit, and like I beat the game using this build. Not that that's like hard to do, because you know I use henchmen just as like something fun to do. But I am going to be doing like hard mode and Winds of Change hard mode, so I'm going to be making a lot of very strange factions only builds. So this is just one of them, and it happens to out DPS Searing Flames and has better energy management. So I figured I would just make a little video on that. And the main thing that's like boosting this over the top is Flare. So like if I were to run even Lava Arrows, it wouldn't hit as many targets, because there have been situations where there's like a stack of like a Ritualist, 2 or 3 Spirits, like a Monk next to him, a Necro, and an Ellie, all in adjacent range, and this would just hit like maybe a Spirit or 2 and whatever else, like a Monk or something. So it's really good to be able to stack all that damage. And this is like more true to how the game was like designed to be played, rather than like abusing like cheesy unlocks. So that, like, I actually do not like the game Eye of the North at all. I feel like it's kind of pulled the game in the wrong direction in a way. Not so much the content, or the story. It's more of like the PvE skills are way too strong. Like even like the Kurzik and Luxon skills, like Save Yourselves is so strong, it's insane. Like 100 armor on your entire team. Like you throw that on like an assassin as the player, and you're just like constantly you're like a soul twisting ritualist with one skill. It's so broken. Like I feel like they need to address some things, but I mean obviously, you know, it's an old game and whatever, but and then the Mesmer update, oh my god. Jesus Christ, don't even get me started on the Mesmer update. That's so dumb. Like Energy Surge was always just decent, but now it's just like it practically has no cooldown, and you just run like 3 Energy Surge Mesmers and it just melts everything. It's just so ridiculous. But anyways, I like the restrictions of factions only. Flare is a pretty good skill. I do remember, I never ran it, but I remember people would get kicked constantly in like factions missions because they were running this fucking skill, and people would get so upset. They'd be like, "Oh my god, Flare's terrible," and then they would ping a bar that essentially looked. Let me remove this. What would they ping? It was always like something like, oh wait. Let me go to an outpost. That would be smart. It was always something like Fireball, Firestorm, Breath of Fire, like Searing Heat or something. Inferno was almost never run, even though this is actually a really good skill too. In Starburst, Inferno, Lava Font, and Flame Burst are very strong together. That's actually the build I beat Winds of Change hard mode on my other account, my main account. It was a Starburst build. I vanquished all of like Cantha and Alona, or Nightfall, whichever you want to refer to it as, with the Starburst build. But Starburst is probably one of the most consistent, strong builds for Fire Ellie. I'll definitely do a video on that soon. It's really fun to use. You are the epicenter of like damage, and it's very fun. So yeah, so like Lava Font hits nearby when you're overcast, and you can use like incendiary bonds to constantly like trigger burning some extra damage on nearby, get your overcast. It's a 1 second cooldown. And then you're just like pounding out damage, and it's insane. Like the build average is like 100 to 120 damage per second on nearby, and it also hits area with Starburst, so it's very strong. But so yeah, there's my Flare video. Obviously, this is like in theory, you know what I mean. But I've actually been using this. It's actually fairly strong. Generally speaking, enemies will run after 3 procs, like after they get hit by 3 ticks of DOT damage. Enemy aggressive casters usually will run after like 7-ish. So like if you put a Firestorm on like an enemy elementalist that's just spamming spells, it'll generally stand in like 80% of it, even without getting knocked down. Sometimes they won't even move, and they just take all the 310 damage or 330 damage, and it's just insane. And then for 5 seconds, they usually run away after like 3. So after like getting hit 3 times is usually when they run. So if you like throw this down, you get about like 3 hits with this plus Flare. And if it's like a Ritualist or something, it's just bonus because you just burn its spirits out. So not too bad.